Welcome to the A.R. Bernard Show. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. The search for belonging and understanding one's place in this world. It's a universal struggle of the human experience. For today's guest, Emmy Award-winning journalist Michelle Miller, that quest runs deep. She built a groundbreaking career in the public eye, all while coping behind the scenes with the reality of never intimately knowing the woman who gave birth to her. She is a co-host of CBS Saturday Morning, and her 2023 memoir, Belonging, A Daughter's Search for Identity Through Loss and Love, was a New York Times bestseller. Please welcome the incredibly inspiring Michelle Miller.
Thank you for having me here, Reverend.
Thank you for being on the program. And again, thank you for the model that you and your husband, Mark Mariel, has set as individuals of color who can be successful in life and have longevity in relationship.
25 years. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
I can't sometimes.
I celebrate it. I promote it because we need those models, especially in a very limited, committed generation and transient in thinking generation. We need models of longevity. So thank you.
Thank you.
And let's jump in. We've got a lot to talk about.
I
want to get to the book because I enjoyed, just the opening chapter where you introduced the whole idea where you set it up. And I have some personal experiences that parallel yours.
That's what's so amazing about the book, how it penetrated, because everyone seemed to have some connect to something that I lived through. Mm-hmm. And that was quite surprising to me, how many people out there have this wide open need for belonging based on their own origin story, birth circumstance, or what have you.
Yeah, and the identity crisis is common to every human being. We go through it, and unfortunately, some never resolve it. But before we go there, we've got a presidential election coming up. And of course, both sides say that whoever wins, it's going to be the end of American civilization, North America, the Western Hemisphere. There are all of these descriptives that determine what's going to happen. I have confidence in the American system. It's been around for a long time, but it will definitely affect the direction that the nation takes on many levels. As a journalist, you're in the mix of all of these things, having to observe, reflect, critique, weigh in, and we will kind of navigate the conversation carefully because I know you have to follow certain guidelines.
Protocols.
And protocols as well. But we have both Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in a dead heat. We don't think those who are already determined who they're going to vote for are really going to change their mind. But there is this gap of individuals who are still trying to make up their mind. Do you think that either of them will move the needle?
Well, certainly someone will. The question is who, and I think we're all waiting on bated breath about the who. I've never seen an election like this, and I've been watching elections for a very long time as a youngster. I remember the first election I paid attention to was the 1976 Carter-Ford election, and really sort of feeling I had skin in the game, understanding. I think I wasn't even 10 years old, and yet the conversations around these two individuals, what it meant coming out of Watergate, an era of distrust, an era of hope, and yet, the factors of the economy, trust in government, all of those things. I feel as though we're dealing with some of that now, but I've never seen such definitive placement in the camps. The polling suggests that those who have made their minds up will not change their minds. And no matter what happens, no matter what's said, you look at the debate, you look at some of the more sensational antics on the campaign trail. There is no budge. And so this idea of the undecided voter has become even more crucial in the fight. And they're going everywhere. Each candidate is going into the territory, traditional territory of the other, to try and glean votes. To see Donald Trump going on a show like The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
To see Kamala Harris, vetting or being vetted by very conservative Republican interests in every battleground state. It's an interesting scenario to be watching.
And even appearing on Fox News. Which was quite interesting.
Quite interesting.
How do you weigh in on that interview?
I don't weigh in.
You don't?
I don't weigh in. I don't cover politics. I'm not on the campaign trail this go round. Full disclosure, I went to school with Kamala Harris. Vice President Kamala Harris, who was a senior at the time. I was a freshman at Howard University. I did not know her at the time, but I did know of her. She was larger than life on campus and went through the pledging scenario. We are members of the same sorority, although I did not pledge at Howard University. I'm an honorary member. So all those disclosures out there. I just think that it is an interesting time, and I'm a student of history, and I know how pivotal this election will be.
So what's different about this particular election than all of the elections you've covered or seen? What's uniquely different, if you can pin it down?
I have never seen an electorate so fully devoted to a candidate as I've seen in this election.
Are you speaking?
Right. Well, over the last year,
Trump?
There's only been one candidate who has been in the race for a year. And when I say the devotion, no matter what is said or what is done, there's no moving that electorate, that base.
Yeah.
No matter what takes place. I look at President Biden, and there was one issue that took him out: age, and the perception that he was too old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one bad debate took him out. 3 weeks, he was out of the race.
Wow. Yeah.
And yet there have been similar situations in the Republican camp that my cohorts my colleagues have reported on. There has been no movement away, no step away. So it's a really interesting measure to look at the various parties and their bases and how they can be moved or how immovable they are. But there is a loyalty that I have, and that's probably the best way to describe it. There's a loyalty and a devotion to in the Republican Party to this candidate that I've never seen before. I would even say even more so. I think you can't compare, President Ronald Reagan to a President Donald Trump. They're completely different individuals, completely different times. That devotion and loyalty was there for him as well. But the things that would traditionally exit someone from a campaign back then, different time now. I think the times have changed, and the electorate certainly is showcasing that they are willing to accept things that they perhaps were not willing. And I think it started back in 1996, actually 1998, with the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the sort of erosion of like what is considered absolutely off base for a candidate. And here we are
But some of the same hypocrisies. I'm going to be very,
well, you can
very
say that
straight up.
but no, I
with
just
my
look at
own
what has happened.
religious evangelical
Mhm.
community, because they held Bill Clinton to a high moral standard and criticized him. It's interesting when you say the times have changed. We're talking about people as well. What people will allow now.
Well, things
they
that are
didn't when.
public, things that have become public about the candidates now, back then, well, I would say prior to 96, when, and even in 92, there were rumors and innuendo out there, but nobody could nail it down.
Right. Yeah.
And so even with the not the election, but certainly the appointment of a Supreme Court justice. I mean, the issues that are relevant to us today, sexual harassment, the inequity in how people deal with women. I think that it's interesting how the needle has moved one direction and then moved back.
You know, you're saying something important, because we're privy to more information now than we were then. I remember when the scandal came out with Gary Hart, he was immediately disqualified.
Immediately.
A video on a boat with a young lady, and it was done.
And she was just sitting on his lap.
Exactly.
She was in a swimsuit sitting on his lap.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is that the landscape of politics, what we know about our candidates, what we believe about our candidates, how we see them in through the moral lens is very different.
Yeah.
What we're willing to accept and what we reject. It has changed. The whole game has changed.
So the presence of religion and religious beliefs and religious influence, we know since the 1970s, the Christian Coalition, Pat Robertson, all of these individuals establishing incredible networks, media platforms to bring this vision of a Christian moral order to American society. And that's the American vision that they have. It's come a long way, and it's gotten stronger and stronger. Do you think that will continue? Or do you think the compromise of their moral authority in connection with Donald Trump has changed that?
I really want to dance around this and not dance into it. All I will say on that subject is I think that there are people who believe I think people who are loyal to him believe that they are doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that they feel as though there is a moral question with respect to voting or supporting him.
That's interesting.
I mean, you know this, right?
Yeah, for many it's a contradiction, and there is a question about the loss of moral authority and the prophetic voice, because it was about holding someone accountable. So now you have someone who clearly it doesn't measure up to the Christian, especially Christian evangelical standard for leadership. And yet there's a personality cult behind him. And I'm going to criticize my own.
Well, no, and you can do that. I have a question for you.
All right.
Let's take your thesis and let's ask the question. If that is the case, what is it that allows them to believe that they are doing the right thing, or that how do you erase that based on your premise?
I think that we are at a place where the Protestant Christian dominated American landscape is shifting. So those who, and I'm careful to use dominant, we're using the word majority now. I think that's shifting where they're losing power, where they're losing influence. And they are now seeing themselves as the marginalized, the disenfranchised. So it's a radical shift in American society when you think about this, because from the very beginning of the 13 colonies, all right, there were Catholics, there were Moravians, there were Quakers, there were Puritans, there were Calvinists, but it coalesced around a Protestant Christian identity, primarily white identity. And that's what shaped American identity, governance, social policy, et cetera, for a long time. And all of a sudden now they're feeling marginalized, and they'll frame it around a threat to Christian religion. But I think it's more a threat to their place of influence in American society.
And competition.
Oh, yeah. Competition for power. And unfortunately, a turning to political power as a way to resecure that majority rule, that majority influence, that dominance. I think that's where we are. And it's scary for many. I talk to them. I hear what they have to say. Until I was able to peel back some of the layers over the truth, the layers of our humanity, the layers of our human experience, the layers of societal constructs from my own faith experience, I didn't see it. But as I continue to grow and evolve and learn and peel it back, I said, wait a minute, there's something at the core here that has been a power structure that is now being dismantled. And people are terrified. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Because when you think about the political candidates on the Republican side, they had much better qualified candidates in terms of presidential qualification. But the personality power of Donald Trump has surrounded him with loyalists.
Well,
And by the way, this is now the Michelle Miller show, and
I know. I want to
do
ask
this.
the
Come on,
question:
it's okay.
how much did celebrity play into that? And if not for a television show and sort of because he was Donald Trump, the businessman, Donald Trump, the television personality, the real estate mogul, all of those things had an element of publicity behind them. I mean, it was always, I remember in the late 80s seeing him in a movie and seeing him on television. He was the conversation of him always mentioning of his name throughout, different pop media moments. So how did celebrity trump politics?
Yeah, celebrity can be an illusion. And I think in the case of Donald Trump, it was an illusion. The Apprentice, that platform allowed him to become more successful than he actually was in real life. He's an entertainer. He knows how to push the right buttons, to evoke certain emotions, and develop a brand loyalty. And I think he's done that very successfully on the platform of political power. The people didn't think of it that way. They're not going to analyze it that way. He knows how to speak like them. So they say, well, he speaks like me. He's one of us. And he's not. But if he can project that, then he wins the loyalty of the people. And he's done it. He's done it very, very well. So here we are.
Let's shift back to it being the A.L. Bernard show.
Yeah. So is America ready for a woman president?
I don't know.
A black
I don't know.
president?
I don't know. I honestly say that I remember having a conversation with my executive producer in 2008, and we were the argument was, would America vote for a black man before they would vote for a woman?
Mm-hmm.
So we know the answer.
We figured that one out. Yeah.
Then it became, was it time for a woman in 2016? And we know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So now you have a black woman. You had a win for an African American and a loss for a woman in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So the big question is, can people get over the hump? Because it seems to be that it's the gender identity, it's the womanhood that is the question more so than the race.
At a time that women are really feeling empowered, I would think.
That too, but then also it's the candidate. A lot of people say it has to be the right kind of woman.
And what is the right kind of woman?
I don't know what that is, because for everyone, it's a different kind of woman.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's we have 200 years worth of the right kind of man or the right kind of men.
I don't know if they're the right kind, but
well,
they've
they were voted into office.
The dominant kind of man. Yeah, I would say
so,
that.
I mean, this is a sociological conversation we're having here. And I think what you're talking about in terms of this fear is really a fear of not belonging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we all need, as you said, it is central to us as human beings. Without belonging, they've done studies. They can test our reaction to the feeling of belonging being so innate to who we are that it is almost a basic need for us. If we don't have it, it is like we are starving from malnutrition. I mean, there are studies that they have done that showcases that this need, this heartbreak for lack of, can do us detrimental physical harm, emotional harm.
That's interesting, because you've now taken what you've written about in your book and you've applied it on a national level to political identity or social identity and how that plays out in, the current landscape that we're dealing with. So are you saying that there are certain segments of this population who don't feel that they belong anymore? And if so, why?
I think you hit it's placement. It's the culture. Sorry about that. The culture as a whole has shifted in so many different ways. It's unrecognizable to many voters. And certainly the shock to the system was the social justice movement following George Floyd's death, murder. For a long time, Black men have been talking about, Black people have been talking about, bad police, not police, bad police, bad police that were inflicting harm, terror, in their communities, not treating them with dignity, bad police. And I say that because, I think Black people and communities of color enjoy good policing.
No, I'm glad you're emphasizing
there is a
that.
difference.
Yeah, because we don't throw all of law enforcement
because they
out.
believe in community policing.
Right.
They believe
That's right.
in having a relationship with officers who are sincerely there to protect and serve. I think it is that you have, with bad policing, a bullying mechanism that this it's a different framework.
We're using the term, I think, bad actors now on the international
and all it
scene.
takes, and it's the same thing with crime. It's 8%, 7%, 10% of a community that can inflict all the harm on the rest. Right. And it's how they trace crime. It's how they know how to deal with crime in specific areas. My husband certainly came in, enacted a number of measures, including ensuring that the police officers were residents and domiciled in the city that they served, ensuring that they were paid a wage that they could live off of, ensured that there were community policing and CompStat maneuvers and grants for the community, increased recreation threefold for the youth, so that they would have something to do, put better placement of police in and around the hotspot areas so that they were part of the community in the public housing areas, reduce crime, overall violent crime by 60%. The murder rate, it was the murder capital of the world.
You're talking about when he was mayor.
When he was mayor from 1990, 94 to 2002, I got there at the end of 94 when they rated number one in the world as the highest per capita murder capital and reduced the murder rate by 70%. FBI statistics on this now. So when you think of like when you do the right thing, and there was no spike in calls of police brutality. So you can do both. You can reduce terror, communities being terrorized by bad police, and you can reduce crime at the same time. It can happen.
Yeah.
So,
and that's important because the other side points to major cities of color and how things function when persons of color are in charge. And they're saying that when persons of color are in charge, things go down, not up. But that is not true.
Well, I don't know, I don't want to get into the full, but there were a host of really good mayors in the 90s but they also had programs. They were aided by the federal government. States were willing to pitch in as well. And you had this tri-tier of activism to reduce crime, because I think at the time in 92, crime was the number one. Crime and the economy were the two top issues. You had a wave of crime throughout cities and suburbs, well, cities in particular. But you had, and that was top of mind for a lot of people. And of course, we were out in 91, 92, we're dealing with the end of a recession. And so I think we're talking a lot of politics here and not so much about belonging, but yes, no, I think that you can do both. It's been proven you can do both. And this, I think it's not fair to associate the running of cities during downturns as a Black or brown problem, because there have been plenty of white people in charge when things go bad.
Yeah. As we close this segment of the conversation, and I think it's important because you're a journalist, you have a trained eye and mind when it comes to what's happening within society around social issues, political issues, spiritual, moral issues, all of that. And that's why I wanted to engage you, because I want to hear from your perspective through your lens, because as a journalist, you feel a sense of responsibility to respond to what you see, what you hear, correct?
I don't know if I feel I can't respond, but I can report.
What's the difference?
The difference is respond, you have an answer for whatever it is that's coming at you. To report on it is, I think you're reporting through this lens of what is taking place. You don't have an opinion on it. Responding adds the opinion, and that's how I see it.
All right. So in response, the opinion dominates. Reporting, the opinion is still present because you can't help the factors that have shaped how you see.
I think that, I have a lens. I'll tell you, like, this is a really interesting part of the book, because I remember being a young intern in Minneapolis, and we were interns of color meeting with the publisher, and he was great. Told us all the right things, how to make a career. At the very end of his conversation to us, he says, but always remember, take the black hat off. You are a journalist. First and foremost, you are not a Black journalist. And by then I was already a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. And for some reason I was taken aback by that response. And so I raised my hand and I addressed it. I responded.
Okay.
I wasn't out of college yet. And I said to him, sir, I don't know how to take the Black hat off, or for that matter, how to take the woman hat off, because that's who I was born as. Those were my experiences. That should have nothing to do with the fact that I'm a journalist. I said, but maybe this will drive the point home. Has anyone ever told you to take your white hat off or your male hat off?
Yeah.
I said, does that make sense now? And he, like the aha moment waved over his head. And he was like, oh my gosh, I just got schooled. Because when you put it in those terms, the recognition is no one has ever questioned my quote unquote objectivity. I said, I was born a 9-pound, 9-ounce mixed child who had a set of circumstances being raised, like you had a set of circumstances when you were raised. And it does color who you are, but no one calls yours into question. And they call mine into question all the time. And therefore, what can I be? I can't be objective. I can be fair. I can try as hard as I can to be impartial, to tell the truth, to have my facts straight, to give a number of sides, bring them into the equation of whatever piece I do. And I can seek objectivity. But like you, objectivity is a pursuit.
Yeah.
None of us can claim it.
Yeah. I think that's important because in my field, I'm dealing with what is called objective truth, right? Truth that remains the same for everyone universally. When we think about God and the transcendent, your life has come through many twists and turns. The opening chapter, you have a conversation with your father, and he basically advises you to go see the world, travel the world, find out more. You were shocked. But
by myself.
Yeah, by yourself.
By myself.
You asked him who were you going to, you didn't have anybody to go with you, right? But then it dawned on you that it was a continued process of learning, growth, and development. Right?
More than that, it was an acknowledgement that my father had faith and a sense that I could handle whatever it was the world would throw at me. And that knowledge made me fearless. As fearless as you can be as a 21-year-old embarking upon a backpacking trip by yourself to Europe and North Africa. It gave me such spirit and such courage to know that my dad believed in me, truly believed in me. And it was like the first time I felt like, wow, he really has faith in me.
But there's something important to that, the absence of your mom. Because you also said something in the book that it's not just those who are with you at these times, but also those who are absent shape, inform, and influence who you are as a person. Your mom was absent. And within a year of that conversation, I believe, it was discovered that your dad had cancer.
Yes.
And now he gives you a new mission.
Yes.
No longer to the world, but go and find your mom.
He was adamant. And I said, Daddy, how am I going to find her? He said, well, I have her birth date and I have her maiden name. And you're a journalist, aren't you?
You can track her down.
And the irony is, and I always say Kismet, the universe, God, however you want to sort of like loop the coincidences of your life into destiny, fate, whatever, that at a point in my life, a young man who went to school with me, went to Howard, we befriended one another through a mutual friend, who died within the span of time that this is all going on. She was killed by a drunk driver. How close we got. And in sharing this story with him, at the time he was a police officer. He had just become a police officer. And he said to me, Michelle, give me the information. I'm going to help you find her. And literally, you would think it was going to be a trudge, right? Yeah. But it wasn't. He came back at me within a week and said, here's her phone number. And do you want to hear something else? The first book event that I had was in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was a very small group of people that were invited to this gathering. And one of the people who was invited had a visitor. And she said, come to this book event with me. I'll be there and we can go to dinner afterwards. And he comes and he was like, oh my gosh, I know her. And I looked out and I said, oh my gosh, in the middle of the event, I said, if not for that guy right there, this would not have happened. So do you see like how I'm touched that way?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a divine order that I'm reconnected. The very first book event of the season, he is present. The person responsible for me finding her is present at, without knowing what he was embarking on.
Divinely orchestrated.
Because I hadn't talked to him in 30 years. I had not seen him in 30 years.
So you find her. You make contact. What happened?
I called her. I said, hi, this is Michelle Miller. Do you know who I am? And there's a pause. And she says, yes, I do. I said, my father told me I needed to find you. And there are many questions I have. He's terminally ill. And he thinks I need to ask you these questions. Will you meet with me? And I fibbed. I said, I'm coming to where she was living at the time. I said, I'm coming to where you live. Can you have lunch with me? And she said, yes. We met for lunch for an hour, and I tried to get as many questions into that hour as possible. And it was a fairly, I want to say, very cordial, delightful conversation. There was no animosity. There was no bitterness on my part. What was interesting about ending the conversation, she said that, I said, would you like to stay in touch? She said, sure. So the next 10 years of my life, we had a very sparse connection. I mean, I would maybe once every 2 to 3 years, I would reach out. And I got married. She says she saw it on television. I thought that was so obscure, right? That she lives in this small town. Well, not small town, but that a wedding in New Orleans would reach her way in California. But she says she saw it. It was when I moved to New York and after I had my son that's when this groundswell of animus developed in me, because she mentioned that she had a granddaughter living in New York, and she talked about this step-grandchild, and she knew I had my son, and she did not even once ask about him. And so there was something about that just, you erased me. No one knows that I exist on your side of the family. And that's the crux of it. It's one thing to meet with someone and to reach out to them and you connect. But there was something about her still being the person I was, and still you were ashamed to admit.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you think it was still the shame and embarrassment of the whole thing?
I think it was a question of the person that she was with her family, and how it sounds to me like she was the one who was always above reproach, right? And so the placement in their lives of her being Saint Laura, the name that I use in here, Saint Laura, versus the reality. And what happened? She was in love with this man. It happens to millions of women all the time. Fell in love, was in love with him, had a child, but the fact he was married, the fact that she gave me away, all of those factors, I think she lived in shame with. And she said to me, when I met with her for the first time, the reason she was never able to have any other children was because God was punishing her. And the shame that she lived with. And so, I could forgive that. But for some reason, I could not forgive this blanket disregard of my children.
Right.
Acknowledge my children, acknowledge them. And it wasn't even enough for her to meet them, because she did finally, after her mother and father passed away and her husband had passed away, she did agree to meet them, but again, in secret, this like shroud of secrecy.
She was Mexican.
She's Mexican American.
Mom, Mexican American, father, African American. Yes, or black.
I am. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm African American. Right. Mother is American, a Chicana of Mexican descent.
Right. Yeah, and was she and her family religious? Because religion plays a very strong role.
They were working class Catholic.
Yeah. That explains quite a bit in terms of the embarrassment, shame, and even the theological notion that God was punishing her because of what took place. And that was continued for decades. That's how entrenched those things, erroneous theology can so influence our lives in this way. Did it matter to you? I mean, what did you feel meeting her would do for you in terms of the person, the identity, Michelle Miller? Well,
it did for a while. That first meeting brought closure. I was able to put a face to name. I was able to sense who she was. I knew what her fears were. I had a sense of the history and the origin story, much more so than I did with my father. And I realized, even within the time that I wrote the book, I realized that my father never gave me any details, and he was always there to fill in the gaps. And I think I never asked him. I never thought that I had permission to ask him. There's so many people in your life now that you have access to that you don't bother to access their memories, their feelings, their emotions, their knowledge base, their point of view. And that was the greatest lesson, because even with my father, there was an absence of acknowledgement of the history. Mm-hmm. And as I said, it was only after I wrote the book did that aha moment hit me.
It happens, like that. Hey, look, I was 40 years old when I found out the truth about my father. In the details. All I knew, he abandoned my mother and I at my birth. And for years, my mom told me that he was dead. And I found out from a cousin that he was actually alive for a period of time that I could have known him. Mm-hmm. But as my 40th birthday, I took my mother out and I said, okay, tell me the story. Mm. And it was around shame and embarrassment. Panama, Catholic environment, very heavily influenced around those ideas. And she said to me, I thought that if you had the information, you would reject me. So here I am, rejected by your father. And now to be rejected by you, I just didn't want that.
The level of secrecy that is ingrained in our histories. There's so much we don't know. And it has been throughout every civilization and every culture, but it is especially painful because oftentimes for African Americans, especially during the first 150 years we were here, we had to wear the shame in our face, in our color, in our color, right? Because we weren't all brown. We were lightened through miscegenation. And so there was an absolute secrecy and lie, what we want to call it, lie or inability to accept the truth surrounding the fact. Because there are people who claim when Roots came out, the raping of Black women did not occur. The love stories between slave and master did not occur. Then how did people get to look like you? I mean, and even my father and his mother and his father, how did they get to look the way they did?
Exactly. My father was white. My father was a white Spaniard. My mother, Black descendants of Africans who came to Central America. Yeah, and here we are, a product of those realities.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want people to walk away from? What's the takeaway from the book?
There's several takeaways. One, know your history, find it. Two, you belong no matter where you are. Three, appreciate those who are present in the same vein that you miss those who are absent.
Mm-hmm.
So give, absolute gratitude to those people who are present in your life, and recognize who is and not who is absent.
Yeah.
The void can be acknowledged, but understand that there is presence also in your life.
Have you forgiven your mom?
I haven't. I've gone through swells of, I'm even at the point at which I am sorry for my flash, because there was one flash I had in absolute anger that I said things that I wish I could take back now. I really said some things in our last conversation that I wish I could take back.
What does forgiveness look like? Forgiving your mom.
Well, I forgive. I understand. It's more of an understanding.
Okay.
I understand why she did the things that she did. I even understand this wearing of shame and not wanting to expose yourself to being judged by those who felt as though they've known you your whole life.
Yeah.
I get that. I get it now. But I think the pride, I think it was pride in me that needed that acceptance. And there have even been people who've been critical of the book who said to me, "Child, she said she didn't want to acknowledge you. Just leave that on the floor. Let it go." So being able to let go of that.
But forgiveness releases her from her sin against you, but it also releases you from carrying the burden of that sin.
It's so interesting. I hear people say that all the time, but I don't understand that. Because there's one person in my life I have never forgiven. And it wasn't even something that person did against me. It's something they did against my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I will never forgive. I say that. I will never forgive that person, because that person understood. It was so venomous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I feel as though I would feel like that if someone had done something to my child.
Well, this is why I ask you, what does forgiveness look like? Because people say, well, I've forgiven. Sometimes they actually have, but they don't think they have.
I don't, so I don't know what forgiveness, for me, forgiveness is acknowledging that what someone did transgressed against you, it's okay. You have come to terms with it, right? And I don't think I've come to terms with that other person, because it was so damaging. Not just, when I say this is how I do. My husband would disagree, but was damaging to a whole place, to a lot of people. Yeah. It was just reckless.
Mm-hmm. Well, forgiveness doesn't mean you let them off the hook. Forgiveness.
Yeah, as long as then I forgive them then, but I don't let them off. I don't forget.
Forgiveness is not.
I don't let that person off the hook, definitely.
No. Forgiveness means that they no longer owe you anything. You've come to terms.
Okay.
With
then I've forgiven everybody. I've forgiven everybody.
You heard it.
You're forgiven.
There's a whole new definition.
You are forgiven. You're forgiven.
But seriously. Because
that's a good definition, Rev. That's a great definition.
Well, the principle is that whatever you're yoked to in life, you carry the burden of. And you can be emotionally yoked to someone's injury against you if you still want revenge, if you feel they owe you something still because of what they did.
So here's the thing. They have paid their debt to society. They have been exposed for the person that they are. So yes, so I feel like, well, I have all this recognition that this person wronged people. There are a lot of people that in the grand scheme of things need to be forgiven. Right?
Yeah. But that's the way you function well, healthy. Because if you attach yourself to someone who's sinned against you.
Okay, so I've forgiven them. Oh, yay. Yeah. Okay, I'm free now.
So you heard it here on the A.R. Bernard Show. A moment of release, a moment of forgiveness. Because really, and I ask that because we use the word, and often we're not clear on what we mean by that, or what it demands of us. And if we think that it's letting a person off the hook, it's not. I happen to be in the documentary Emanuel 9, the shooting that took place.
Oh, I know. I covered
Charleston,
it.
Right?
I covered it.
The story.
I lived in South Carolina.
And that was a major moment of forgiveness. But they did not take him, Dylan Roof, off the hook. The family, wanted things to play out and justice to be served. But what they decided in that courtroom when they said, we forgive you, right? They said, we're not going to carry this thing any longer.
Right.
We're going to release this from ourselves.
And I don't think you have ever seen a community of people react the way they did then, but for that case.
Yeah.
People of victims' families. You look at, I've covered a lot of these trials, mass shootings, school shootings, racially motivated shootings, and victims' families generally are incensed by those who have taken their loved ones.
Yeah.
And they are still pained by it.
Yeah. Justifiably so.
Yes.
But I think that was a moment, and on a grander scheme of things, I will tell you, I know across the country of certain groups who were prepared to react to what took place. But that preparation and those intentions, water was thrown on it.
Well,
it was doused because of that moment of forgiveness.
And look what happened. So I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, the cradle of Confederacy, the capital of the state that waved the flag, the Confederate flag above the State House. In 1993, there was a movement to remove that flag, and they could not do it. Over the course of months and months of deliberations, they could not do it. But within weeks,
That's right.
weeks, 2 weeks, that flag came down.
Yeah. And I consider those divine moments of God's intervention in human history and human society to make a very, very important point. Those are the moments that we see the greatest change take place within society. Michelle, it's been great.
It has been great. I wish you didn't talk so much about politics in this conversation, but...
Does that mean I have to have you back?
Maybe.
Yeah. It would be great, so we can talk about a lot of the things.
Yes. But no, look, this is the age in which we live.
Yeah. And, people are trying to make sense of the future, socially, politically, in our society. And they're struggling to figure it out. So as many voices as we can add to the conversation that have really something to say and give a sense of direction, I think it's really important. So thank you for
thank you
to the program and the conversation.
I appreciate it. I really am happy to have been here.
The book, Belonging, by Michelle Miller. Make sure you get your copy, all right? And understand her journey and her new discovery about the word forgiveness. And thank you, our listeners. If you want to connect with Michelle on social media, her info is in the description of this episode. And as always, if you like what you heard, please, you know the deal, subscribe, like, and share. You can find us on all podcast platforms, and we'll be back with another great conversation right here on the A.R. Bernard Show.